Hi.
So, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Pamela Eastfeld, la présidente de la PAFSO. I'm Pam Eastfeld, the PAFSO president, and I'd like to welcome you all to this breakfast with our friends from the Canadian Labour Congress, our president Bea Bruske and assistant Tim Deelstra. So I am not going to do a long introduction because, oh, sorry. First of all, I want to say I am chairing this meeting from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people and acknowledge them as the past, present, and future guardians and caretakers of these lands. And I invite everyone to take a moment to think about where you're joining from and what that means. So I'm not going to do a long introduction of Bea and Tim because I think that their stories are more interesting to hear from themselves. But Bea is in her second term as the president of Canadian Labour Congress, only the second woman, I understand, to be in this position. And the Canadian Labour Congress is a trade union association that represents which most Canadian unions, not PAFSO, are members of. And represents the collective interests of those members and labor on a whole variety of issues and in both national and international fora. So Bea, I'll just turn it over to you maybe to take it from there and to tell us about your organization and yourself. And we'd like to hear from Tim as well about his background and his role in all of these things. I understand we're going to speak in English, but if people are listening and they have questions in French, feel free to use French when you type them in, and I will just do a little translation as we run. So Bea, welcome and over to you.
Thanks so much, Pamela. And thank you so much for having both Tim and I to chat with you folks today about the CLC, the work that we do, and how Canada's unions really move the dial on issues across the country for workers in Canada. So I am the current president of the Canadian Labour Congress. This is my second term. And prior to that, I worked in Manitoba as part of the United Food and Commercial Workers, very large union across Canada representing folks in retail and food processing and absolutely every very different sectors right across the country. And in that time, I spent my time really being a union rep, an organizer, as well as a full-time negotiator. And when I left, I was the secretary treasurer of my local in Manitoba. In this role, I have the privilege and the pleasure of speaking on behalf of 3 million workers right across this country, working within 50 different union affiliates, so some very small unions and some very huge unions, private sector, public sector, trades unions, and everything in between. So we have a wide variety of union members that participate and belong to the Canadian Labour Congress. And really, our role at the Canadian Labour Congress is to push for worker issues at the federal level, primarily. So we try to firstly make sure that all of the unions are pulling in a similar or same direction when it comes to priorities and issues. And that can be somewhat challenging at times, I have to be honest, because different unions, although we have the same values, have different ways of achieving their goals. And so trying to make sure that everybody is on the same page and that there's good collaboration between unions is very important to us. But then making sure that we're always moving the issues forward with our federal government and making change for workers across Canada is critically important. And when I say workers, I don't just mean unionized workers, I mean all workers. And so I'll get into that a little bit more, but maybe I'll stop here and have Tim introduce himself and speak to his background as well.
Well, thanks, Bea, and thank you, Pam, for the invite. Happy to be here. So my name is Tim Deelstra. My pronouns are he, him. I am a political assistant to the president of the CLC, one of 4 who are the senior managers at the CLC. We are structured, of course, with various departments and regions, and part of my portfolio is to look after governance and affiliate relations, as well as the regional offices of the Congress. So I get the great opportunity to come and talk to our various affiliates and hopefully future affiliates all across the land, which I very much enjoy. Like Bea, I also came from the United Food and Commercial Workers, where I was a union rep in Ontario, sort of representing workers across every workplace sector, and have been very active with my local Labour Council, as well as the Ontario Federation of Labour, prior to having the opportunity to come and join Bea and do the good work all across Canada. Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you for coming. I remember I grew up in Manitoba as well, and I remember that UFCW strike in 1987 with the grocery stores. And I remember thinking at the time, ooh, is this gonna work? How are they gonna get anywhere? And you did, and I remember it was really one of the first times that I really understood, okay, this is what a labor movement can do, and this is what it can achieve for people. So yeah, that's a great pedigree as far as for those of us who follow these issues. So thank you.
Well,
So
certainly that strike is the entire reason why I'm working in the labor movement. I was a high school student going to high school, graduating that summer, going into university, and found ourselves on a picket line because our very successful employer wanted to roll back wages and benefits for their workers. And so we went on strike for 125 days, and we had a lot of support across the labor movement in Manitoba. And really, that strike was a make or break. If we wouldn't have won that strike, we wouldn't have a union at this giant company we call Loblaws in Manitoba, anyways. And so it was really critically important, and it really opened my eyes to the kind of work that unions do. Because certainly, when you're in high school, that's not part of the career day kind of offering that you generally get a career day, right? But for those of us who've had the opportunity to work in the labor movement, it's incredibly important. Both Tim and I come from a union that very much prides itself on servicing members, meaning we go into workplaces, we ensure that their collective agreement is being enforced, that all of the things that have been negotiated at challenging bargaining tables is actually taking place in that workplace, and that members are gaining those benefits, those wages, those premiums, and all of those kinds of things. And that when there is an issue, that you're filing that grievance and that you're making sure that the employer is adhering to that collective agreement. And it's no different, taking it to that next step when it comes to the CLC. Our role really is to service affiliates like yours. You're not an affiliate yet, but hopefully sometime in the future, right? And to make sure that we're addressing the needs that various different unions have. And so identifying what the priorities are for that union, for their members, for their specific sector, for their region, and then ensuring that that's continuously raised with our federal government. So the CLC is very active politically, of course, and we're coming up to a lobby day on November 28th, where we'll be meeting with elected government officials, senators on the Hill. This is our third lobby day this year. Actually, our first one was back in February. We had over 400 folks from a variety of different unions from all across Canada come to Ottawa to have a training session and to go and meet with literally hundreds of different kinds of meetings with various different politicians of different political stripes to ensure that we're raising our voice on the issues that matter. In early October, we had an Indigenous Lobby Day, very specific to First Nation issues, with lots of folks, again, across Canada coming together, and we'll have our third Lobby Day at the end of this month. And I'm really proud of the work that the CLC has been able to accomplish. Like, some of our most recent wins include things like 10 paid sick days at the federal level. Those things don't just happen by themselves. They happen because unions and the CLC lobby for them, and that we make sure that we have the research as to backing up why we need this, that we have the workers' voices being raised to participate in various different campaigns to make these things happen. So we were really proud of that. And of course, getting things like that at the federal level also helps us get those things at the provincial level. And at the provincial level, we work through federations of labor in each province and territory across the country. And at the civic level, we work through labor councils that work in various different regions, usually in larger urban centers, but there are some in more rural settings, who also lobby their municipal governments on a variety of worker-related issues. I'll maybe stop there and throw it to Tim to talk about federations of labors and labor councils.
Yeah, thanks, Bea. So as Bea said, we have also through the Congress set up subsidiary bodies under our Constitution at the provincial level. Every province has a federation of labor that has its own governing body that's, again, has affiliated unions sitting there to focus on those provincial issues. And we work very closely with them so that we can advocate for all the stuff that we're doing federally at the provincial level, but also to help support the provincial level with whatever various legislation they're working at. We have seen things like card check certification showing up in British Columbia and other places. Obviously, this is the sort of labor legislation that we'd like to see broadly. across the country, and we support that wherever we can, as well as fighting attacks against the labor movement, like we saw in Ontario, where Premier Doug Ford utilized the notwithstanding clause to try to bypass a CUPE collective agreement, and the labor movement united together in Ontario to make sure that that didn't happen and force the Conservative government to withdraw that pretty bad legislation, that anti-worker legislation. We also have labor councils. So labor councils are similarly structured where they are municipally based collections of unions. There are 88 of them across the country, with another 15 in Quebec. Our relationship with Quebec, of course, is respecting the sort of two-nation concept there, where the FTQ in Quebec operates most of the labor movement there in conjunction with the CLC, and that includes also operating 15 labor councils in the province. Through the rest of the labor councils, the other 88 throughout the country, we have regional offices all across the country where we have regional staff who help support the labor councils, as well as the affiliates on the ground when they have campaigns, actions, strikes, various things. And so we're very active also in the broad labor movement, making sure that unions have support. Our affiliates issues are focused on at all levels, municipal, provincial, and federal. And yeah, our folks are out there working hard. I would say that we do a lot with little all across the land.
Excellent. Excellent. No, it's really interesting. Can I ask, so what happens, say you hear about something like Doug Ford wanting to bring in the notwithstanding clause. So the phone goes off at CLC. Hey, there's something happening. We want to stop happening. What happens next? Like, this is a question I often like to ask the people that we have these panels with, like, okay, in practical terms, like, what do you do next? Who do you talk to? Who do you call? What are the steps that you would take to get to mobilize everyone and get to the actions that you want?
So in that particular case, CUPE was the union representing the lowest paid education workers in the province of Ontario, right? The educational assistants, the people cleaning classrooms, all those kinds of things, right? And Doug Ford really wanted to hold their wages very, very low and not really give them anything significant. And it was really extremely frustrating, especially coming through COVID and all of the work that these folks have done and the importance that they play in our education system. So what we normally do, and Tim is the contact generally for our affiliates, is our affiliates will reach out to us often and say, we have this major issue burning. Can you please assist us in whichever way possible? And so we'll collaborate with that affiliate to find out what the need is, what the immediate need is. We will call other affiliates of the other unions. We will get that information out through the backphone, so to speak, in terms of mass emails to say, hey, there's a huge issue brewing over here. In that particular case, it was so well covered in the media, everybody was aware of what exactly was happening, but that's not always the case, right? So making sure that we can connect with our contacts and get everybody on the same page as to what is happening, why it's happening, and what our pushback needs to be and why is critically important. And so in that particular case, it was many, many phone calls. It wasn't just the CLC acting, it was all of the affiliates really pulling together and coming out in strong opposition, including some of the groups that we don't necessarily hear from all that often, I have to be honest, right? And so, everybody collectively raising their voice against it is what turned the tide. If it would have been just one or two unions, it would not have had the impact, right? It would not have caused Doug Ford to back down. So I'm really proud of the labor movement coming together, including folks that aren't affiliated to the CLC, to stand in solidarity and to say, this is wrong. And if we let this go, workers' rights will be demolished, right? Because anybody can then just use the notwithstanding clause to push through an unfair collective agreement, an unfair set of, principles.
Yeah. And I mean, not that I'm an expert on this, but that's not really what that's for, like you can't negotiate a deal that you like. And so therefore you just, use the clear option in the Constitution.
Right. But, it's interesting because we're seeing it happen more and more. We see Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe trying to use it against trans kids, right? And so those are all things that the CLC and the labor movement concerns itself with. We all went en masse to Saskatchewan to protest that particular piece of legislation, and we're working with the Saskatchewan Federation of Labor to see how else we can stymie that particular bill going through. Unions concern themselves with more than just the bargaining table and their own set of members, whether it's political action or whether it's human rights issues. We are on the cusp of many of those things. for the CLC right now, we've got three main priorities that we're very, very focused on. And that's affordability. All Canadians across the country are feeling the pinch in terms of being able to afford anything. Interest rates, although they've paused for the moment, have risen at such an exceptional level that we know folks are worried about remortgaging their homes. They're worried about losing their homes. It's a very real situation. We're worried about our healthcare system across Canada. We know it's in dire straits. We have issues with recruitment and retention in healthcare. We have issues with aging infrastructure, all sorts of concerns that we need to think about. And we have a climate crisis that's happening. And so these are three hot burning issues, literally in the case of climate. I mean, I'm sitting in Winnipeg today and it's going to be 10 degrees in middle of November, which is not the norm at all. I know you grew up here too, Pam, and like we're used to
for sure.
snowbanks at this time of year, right?
I remember Halloween going out with my ears over my hood my parka hood every year, right, as a kid, and it's not like that anymore. Yeah.
The costume had to fit over the parka. That was the mantra, right? So these are kind of the things that the CLC right now is very much focused on. And we need to make sure that we have certain pieces of legislation passed, that we're making sure that the federal government is working with the provincial governments on healthcare, right? And that Canadians get relief. And so we're advocating for things like pharmacare, a national pharmacare system, because workers shouldn't have to choose between paying the rent and buying their prescription drugs, and yet we know all too often that happens. We were super proud that the NDP recently, in the last 2 years, as part of the Supply and Confidence Agreement, was able to get a commitment to institute a national dental care program. We know that once every 9 minutes, a Canadian shows up in an emergency room with a dental emergency. Like once every 9 minutes. That's crazy when you think about it, right?
Wow.
And so, having a pathway to now getting a national dental care program has been critically important. And we've been advocating for that for a long time as well. So, these are kind of the big picture pieces that we work on within Canada. But outside of Canada, the CLC is also very active on the international stage. We belong to the International Labour Organization. So my coworker, Lily, she's our Secretary Treasurer, Lily Chang out of Toronto. She is the person from the CLC that goes to all of those ILO meetings in Geneva. She just came back from 2 weeks. They passed a resolution on right to strike. And, she's very, very active on all of those files, along with the business community that attends, along with government representative that attends. And we get to hear what's happening around the world on labor issues in that forum. We also work with the International Trade Union Confederation, again, unions from across the world participating in that. So Siobhan, my other co-officer, and I, Siobhan Vipond, she and I sit on a number of committees that we participate in to understand what's happening around the world for workers, how we can support workers in other parts of the world, and how we can act in collaboration. What do we need to push our federal government on when it comes to international issues? These are critically important to us.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is, I don't think I really understood the international aspect of these kinds of things. But can I ask you maybe, like, what trends are you seeing? To me, it seems like, labor in some ways is the canary in the coal mine for a lot of other, bad things that the rest of society needs to worry about as well. And I wonder what trends you guys are seeing domestically and internationally that we should be watching. And while you answer that, I'm going to get up and refresh my coffee. So I'm just going to turn my camera off, but I will be
Sure.
listening.
Yeah, I think one of the things that concerns me the most as we're hurtling towards 2024 is the rise of the right and the lack of good democratic discussion and debate at every level of government and even just within society. And that I find that very concerning, because reacting to a quick statement that a politician makes versus having a thoughtful conversation, a discussion around something is really problematic. And I'll give you an example here. We've been very much advocating for the Sustainable Jobs Act, which is called Bill C-50 in Parliament. It's at the committee stage right now. So the committee is studying this particular bill. And every single time that there's been a committee hearing, the Progressive Conservative Party wants to shut down that particular discussion. And so they're dragging out the process of actually getting this bill through committee. This is an incredibly important bill because it means that once passed, it will establish a framework for business, for unions, and for governments to sit down to figure out what sustainable jobs future means for Canadian workers across this country. And how do we pivot from fossil fuel burning industries to a green economy? It's really important work that we need to do, especially when we see in the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed well over a year ago. There's commitments flowing, there's investments flowing to maneuver into green jobs. We're way behind in Canada, and we're way behind because we haven't yet got this bill passed. And so instead of actually coming and working collaboratively, certain folks in government don't want to actually work collaboratively. And it's incredibly frustrating because there's jobs on the line. Our transition to a green economy is on the line. And so just that narrow view of being obstructionist versus actually having something constructive to say, I see that more and more in our society. I think we all do. I see it as being the Trump effect that we see from down south, and it's not helpful, right? It's actually kind of scary, and it's stymieing progress. That is the biggest concern that I see. Tim, do you want to add to that? Do you have thoughts as well? I know you see this as well in our world.
Well, obviously that is a tremendous issue, and it's really impacting our ability, as Bea said, to advocate for important change. And it is a bit troubling because it seems like we're following a pattern that's come out of the United States in terms of, instead of having proper discourse, just sort of screaming at each other. And there are big issues of the day, the issues of affordability. Our regional representatives hear this all across Canada. There isn't a part of the country where people aren't concerned about being able to afford housing, the food, the heating. Yeah, you name it. Like inflation rates have been jumping and jumping and jumping. And these are very serious issues. And we're certainly seeing that have an impact also when workers across the country are collective bargaining, that there's a deep need for people to catch up. And workers are expressing that. And we're seeing that not in one or two sectors, but in every workplace sector all across the country. So, while the business community does what they always do with these things, we need to see some positive change here, and government is a key angle on that at all levels, frankly. And if we get stymied with just sort of shouting against the wall, it's really troubling and not really helping the people of the country.
I would say
go ahead,
sorry, go ahead, Pam.
Oh, no, I was just going to make an editorial comment on, how I was watching all of the things related to, healthcare workers and essential workers during the pandemic. And, oh, we love you. We need you. We want to keep you. And then it's like, well, what can we do to keep you? It's like, well, you can pay me properly. You can pay me more money. Oh, well, except for that.
Right.
Come on.
And passing laws in Ontario in particular to prevent public sector workers who are really keeping the economy going and keeping the country going. Bea and I, as we said, we come from the United Food and Commercial Workers. I think traditionally people have not really regarded grocery stores as places of great employment or real jobs. And what we all realized, I think, through the pandemic is that when we needed those folks, we really needed them quite badly. They had to go to work every day through the pandemic, those grocery workers, as well as food workers, healthcare workers, all of these people who have generally, I think, been a little disregarded and a little underserved by not only governments and employers, but sometimes the public at large. And I do believe that people came through that experience appreciating more so what's happening. I think we saw that when Unifor, one of our non-affiliated unions, had a strike recently in Ontario with the Metro grocery chain. There was large public support for that, where I think traditionally we wouldn't have expected to see that in that industry. And so that's sort of the other end of the coin that I hope is there, is that the broad public now are also seeing that workers need support, and that unions are one of the ways that that happens. We are seeing generally that there is a more positive response about the idea of workers joining trade unions and being represented, as there is a need for them. I mean, people need workplace representation, and now, sadly, more than ever.
And we've had some really important wins over the last while. I mean, Tim talked about things like making sure that we have opportunities for workers to be able to join unions in a more fruitful way. And certainly BC passed card check legislation. We're hoping to get similar legislation in Manitoba. We have a new provincial government here. But federally, anti-scab legislation was introduced in Parliament on Thursday last week, which was incredibly exciting. It's been decades of the labor movement, unions across Canada working for this legislation, which will really balance the bargaining table, right? When you know that the employer can't replace you with a scab worker while you're off on a strike, or you've been locked out in the extreme cases where employers
choose to lock you out and replace you with a scab, right? Banning the use of replacement workers is going to be critically important to balance that bargaining table. And so this legislation was introduced last week. The labor movement collectively has been pushing for this for decades, for as long as I can remember. It's a very exciting time where we're actually finding some pathways to making good inroads on labor legislation. And last year we had the bankruptcy protection bill that passed, so meaning that workers are first in line when an employer goes bankrupt, right? Rather than being behind all the banks and all the other creditors that have to be paid off first, workers get to be at the front of the line. And we saw that with Nortel and with Sears in Canada, where those workers lost big chunks of their pension because it wasn't funded, and that's not right. So there's wins along the way that keep us going, but there's many headwinds as well that we have to constantly be pushing back against.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that people know about those things, because I think sometimes people feel very alone, and just start thinking, well, I'll just try to get the best deal for myself, and not working together, see working with a union as an impediment from time to time, right? Like, we see that every now and again. Somebody will be like, well, if I could negotiate my own contract, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. But yeah, one of the things about the federal anti-scab legislation is I noticed there's a huge carve out for the federal government, right? It's just not included. And I haven't really, I mean, I need to ask my colleagues, from the NJCBA side. I haven't really heard us collectively talking very much about what we're going to do about that, if we're going to be trying to get it to apply to us, or I don't know. But have you had any discussions about, like, the whole federal public sector basically is not, or federal government anyway, is not in there?
Yeah.
And I don't know
so
if that's a compromise that was negotiated, or
it's certainly not a compromise that was negotiated. It's been difficult even getting to this particular stage. So last federal election in the fall of 2021, the federal Liberals ran on anti-scab legislation in the case of a lockout only, with much more limited application, of course. It was because of the supply and confidence agreement that it was extended to strikes as well. Now, as it's only been introduced, and of course it's going to have to get to committee stage, and there'll be opportunities for amendments at the committee stage. I would say, though, that adding a broader application is going to be challenging, if not almost impossible at this stage of the game. But for us, the importance is getting it passed, and let's work on improvements once it's passed, because I've been in the labor movement since 1987, since that strike in Manitoba. We've been talking about it since 1987. It's never happened at the federal level. So getting it in place first and foremost has to be the key. And then we need to work on broadening it after that. Of course, we already have provincial anti-scab legislation in British Columbia and in Quebec. The world hasn't stopped. The economy is still going strong in those provinces. So, we're very hopeful that we're going to actually get this accomplished in this session. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And I agree with you that, you don't want to sort of over egg the custard and then kind of like have it not happen for everybody, because if it becomes more of a norm, then eventually, other parts will have to catch up. Right?
This legislation will actually cover 1 million workers in 22,000 different employers across the country. So it is pretty significant. 1 million workers, I would say, is pretty significant. And getting that benchmark in place is critically important to be able to move the needle forward.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. What other things are you guys working on that we should know about?
Absolutely. Well, we have a multitude of departments. So our main office is, of course, in Ottawa. We have about 100, just under 100 employees, and we have regional offices across the country that Tim spoke about earlier. And Tim navigates all of the regional offices and makes sure that all of the various different regions are functioning, that we're supporting the work in the regions. But at our national office, we have an education department that provides all kinds of courses and training for a variety of different affiliates. That works with our political action and comms department as well to deal with various different campaigns that we have ongoing at any given point in time. I would encourage your members to check out CanadianLabour.ca. That's our website. They can see all of the various different priorities that we're working on collectively, and the different affiliates that belong to our organization, as well as the recent wins and the current challenges that we're bumping up against. Making sure that we build worker engagement is critically important to us. Building our digital space to make sure that people see our messaging and can participate easily in campaigns is critically important. I'm really proud of our political action and comms department, our education department, our research department for building out so much capacity and to actually engage workers. So we're in the process of right now doing a significant education review, because we found that since COVID, like many other things, how we deliver education has also changed. And we're broadening out what we might be able to offer in the future, whether it be through webinars, online things, in person. I still think in person is very critical, and it's the best because, we all know those sidebar conversations that we have often lead to the biggest, aha moments and to the biggest collaboration. But I'm really proud of the work that's being done there, because most workers work their way into a job and don't necessarily understand that they're unionized. They don't necessarily understand what the union does for them, why it's important to be active within their union, and how they can become active. So we're working on all of those things as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's always one of my questions is, how we were talking about podcasts before we started. Hey, maybe we should make our these Zoom sessions into a podcast so that people can listen to them that way. The young like podcasts. So I like podcasts too. I sometimes when I hear people talking about young people, I'm like, yeah, and then I'm like, oh no, wait a minute, I'm not in that demographic anymore.
I make that mistake too, Pam.
yeah. It's like I don't feel like I'm in that other demographic until I have to do an online form, and I have to like scroll all the way down to my year of birth, and then I'm like, ooh, But that's one of our questions, I guess, is we have a whole bunch members who came in. They sort of started hiring. We incorporated the Foreign Service International Assistance stream in 2019 when they moved from people who've been in former CETA jobs, program manager jobs, and created a new stream in our group that deals with that. But then they've also done a couple big hires in the last couple of years. And these folks are, they came in either right before or during the pandemic for the most part, or, a bunch came in started this fall. They haven't really, they haven't had those face-to-face things. And, I used to complain about going to start the PAFSO breakfast at 8 a.m., like in person in the department. But, people would come and we would always, there would always be a chance for a chat before and after, and people could would ask questions sometimes that were not related to the speaker, which used to annoy me back then. But, now I realize is a good thing that we're missing. How, do you guys have any ideas on, are you seeing any differences? I mean, any approaches that are working better with new folks, younger folks than others, or any advice for us? I see we've got Adam here, who's our advocacy officer as well. So he's the one, I poke, he and Daniel, I poke them to implement some of these things. So I'm curious, what have you guys been trying that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I'll flip it to Tim shortly, but I feel like you have to do absolutely a little bit of everything, because different folks want different things. When you factor in time zones, when you factor in the width of our country and trying to navigate all of that, when you're thinking about regional differences and priorities, I feel like you have to do a little bit of everything. In person is still my personal favorite for a whole variety of reasons, but we know getting people to an in-person meeting is near impossible these days. Everybody is stretched to the limit, right? With multiple jobs, multiple family obligations. So, doing things like you're doing today, taping this and making it available at different time slots is critically important. I know in my old work life, we tried things like a telephone town hall. So we would have the entire province on the phone at the same time so that people could actually ask questions and, send in an email with their questions and whatever. And that was fantastic because people that would have had regional meetings in the past could hear what other regions are saying. So it was more inclusive in that way.
But, between webinars, between the option of podcasts, people still like print materials as well, right? So you have to do absolutely everything. And having a robust digital game, I think, is also critically important. And our team is doing that very well at the CLC in terms of being on in all the social media spaces, being able to link back and to be able to engage folks in that way. Tim, what's your thought?
Yeah, pretty much everything that Bea just said. I mean, if you look at every area where we try to engage through the Congress, be it education, communications, campaign work, all of these things, there is a range that has to happen, and then we see different wants and needs all across the country and different areas of the country. So definitely we have invested significantly into digital resources. We have joined with the AFL-CIO in a system called Action Network, which is a digital engagement tool that we utilize ourselves to push forward our campaigns, which is very successful. We make this available to the affiliates and also to our labor councils to help them be able to advocate and push their own messages. And we have seen that the numbers have consistently been going up and up and up and up on that. But that's only one system that we have. Our regional reps attend labor councils, which typically have monthly meetings where people come in the community. And that is very valuable to get union members together to hear things that aren't in their workplace, right? Like everybody has to go buy groceries at some point. So hearing from UFCW about the realities of what that work is like is, I think, a valuable perspective. Hearing from CUPE about their municipal workers and what they're going through is a valuable perspective. Certainly since we've been talking, Pam, I've really enjoyed hearing about your members, and that was a whole different workplace perspective than I had ever heard before, and is very interesting to me. So the value of those in-person meetings, being able to hear directly from people, is never going to go away. It is traditional, but it is an important one. So we're working very hard at trying to see where we can have the biggest impact, get our message out the most. We're very engaged also in outreaching to media sources, and I think, is sort of relentlessly in the media and constantly busy. We ship Bea all across this country from stem to stern on a regular basis as well to meet with people. And, we try to do whatever we can, wherever we can, all across the land. Our education review is a prime example of that, where we heard just through the initial outreach that we have to basically do it all. In-person is important for reasons. Zoom meetings are good. Asynchronous and synchronous is good, like having printed materials available. This is a thing that we're now trying out with our lobby day, where traditionally we just brought people in the day before our national lobby day to train them on the issues and run them through a thing. This year we heard from people that some folks needed a deeper dive. And so we have specific webinars on each one of the main priority topics that we're offering to people that they can, listen whenever they want to, frankly, before, after, or during the lobby day, which I think is going to be very beneficial. So sort of trying to do it all.
Yeah, that seems to be the answer, right? That there's no one size fits all, that people really like things that they can do on the run, but they also want to supplement that with being able to interact with somebody when they can. So yeah, it sounds interesting. But can I ask you about your lobby day? What kinds of things are you going to be? We got some of your priorities there, but I'm wondering how do you do a lobby day? Like what goes into it? Who comes? How do you set something like that up?
Yeah, there's a significant amount of prep work that has to happen for lobby day, of course, and it's working with our affiliates to always identify what our three main priorities are. We try to go in with three priorities because otherwise it gets too diluted, right? And every affiliate has their own issues as well, and they're free to raise those issues, of course, but we really try to stick to the three main themes that I mentioned earlier. But just getting folks to come to Ottawa, working through the affiliates to actually get their folks registered to come to Ottawa to meet and have a training session. And Tim alluded to just in the last segment here, the fact that this year, a lot of our affiliates said, you know what, we want a deeper dive on those issues. And so there have been webinars set up. I think they're actually happening this next week, where people can dial in to understand what the issues are that they're going to be lobbying on in a more succinct way and have the background, more details than what we can offer in an evening training session.
Many folks are familiar with those issues, but if you're a retail worker and you haven't thought about sustainable jobs, you might not be as comfortable speaking about that issue, for example, right? So making sure that folks are comfortable to have the materials that they need is very important to us. And once we know who's all coming to Lobby Day, we divvy up the folks from different affiliates, put them together with other folks that they may not necessarily know. And our political action team then assigns them to go and meet with certain politicians. So we have a training session the Monday evening. On the Tuesday morning, it's go time, and everybody gets their list of meetings that they're going to on Parliament Hill and in the surrounding areas. They have their speaking points, their speaking notes, and they go from meeting to meeting. They make their pitch, they have the conversations, and any takeaways that we get from politicians are reported back so that we can follow up, whether there's requests for further information or details, those kinds of things. And we also ask folks in the different regions to go and meet with their MP from their region. So it's not necessarily that it all happens in Ottawa on one day. There are also opportunities for folks to say, oh, I'm from Saskatchewan, I'm from BC, I'm from wherever, I'm going to go and meet with my MP on these 3 issues. I'm going to make a specific request to go and meet in my home community. And sometimes that's actually more meaningful when you can make sure that you're actually talking to the folks that you help elect, right? And that you're holding them accountable to what your priorities are. So we try to match that up based on, the sectors, based on the regions, but also based on geographical location. And then the evening of Lobby Day, there's generally a reception where we invite politicians. The folks that have been at lobbying all day are invited as well. And people can mix and mingle and get to know one another and still continue the conversation, so to speak.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds like it's a big thing. How do you find your do you find that MPs are interested in talking to you, or is it I mean, has it been getting harder to get meetings or easier? How is it kind of how does it go when you're trying to reach out to different people?
I think certain MPs are always very happy to meet. Others, not so much. Let's be frank. And MPs are also incredibly busy people. So getting all of those meetings, especially when you have a large number, like we had 400 people in February, like that is a lot of folks to fit into meetings. So this Lobby Day will be a little bit smaller. But making those meetings meaningful, I think, is more important than the amount of meetings that we have. So making sure that you have the details that you want to impart, that you have conviction. It's so critically important that workers come and tell their stories, because it's one thing for me to go and say it, but it's another thing for a worker to sit across from an MP and say, you know what, I was a retail worker during COVID and I had to go to work. I did not have sick time. You know what I mean? And I was worried about my family's safety. It has a different impact when it's a worker telling their specific experience and their specific story from their community versus me saying it as a leader of this organization, right? And so it's really, really important that we get that participation from workers of all stripes, especially on things like climate change, right? We've got oil and gas workers coming to speak at Parliament Hill about understanding that the need for changes in their industry, but worried about what the future holds for their communities, and making sure that we get these bills passed so we can deal with these issues, right? Like, it is a really critically important piece of the work that we do. And it's critically important to us that affiliates, that union members participate in it.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at the time. It's almost 10 to 10. So I'm just wondering if anybody, Adam, do you have any questions, or does anybody have any comments or anything that they want to make? We're not a huge bunch here, so I can let folks talk if they want to talk. Hi, Adam.
If no one else has a question, I could jump in. But I guess one thing I may be curious about, or wondering if you guys could speak to a little bit more, is kind of I guess the link between climate change and labor, and why that's an important issue for a labor organization to be taking up, because I think for some fields, it's kind of immediately obvious why these two things would be linked. If you're working in an oil field and there might be big changes coming, that's pretty clear. But I guess broadly speaking, why is that something that people should be maybe thinking about?
It's such a good question. And here's the thing. Before I got involved in this work, I didn't necessarily link education workers to climate change. But what I hear from education workers all the time is, I work in an old building. It is too hot in the summers to actually teach in that building. We don't have students that are able to actually pay attention when I'm sitting in a building and it's 35 degrees inside the building. And so we need to be able to figure out climate change solutions that doesn't necessarily mean fossil fuels being burned to run the air conditioning system, for example, right? We know that 5% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide come from our healthcare sector. We have healthcare sector workers who are worried about those things, right? And needing to pivot in terms of how we provide care and how diagnostics are done and those types of things. So it's not just oil and gas workers. It's even workers working in again, the retail sector. We don't give out plastic bags anymore. We have to deal with, members of the public being angry about those things. And we as workers have to explain why that is the case. And our employers aren't necessarily always helpful on these things. These things are one-off individual situations, but they're all linked to things that we need to do to actually impact climate change in the long run. And so we have all different workers across the country who are worried about the impacts on their jobs or are already seeing the effects. We hear from healthcare workers who are seeing the effects of workers showing up in the emergency rooms because it's too hot out in the summertime, because the air is not safe to breathe. We saw the smog all across different parts of Canada this summer. We have workers that are being displaced from their homes. We saw that again in Northern Alberta. We saw that in the Northwest Territories, where people had to leave their communities, leave their jobs behind for 6, 7, 8 weeks at a time. That has a significant impact on the economy in that section of the world, right? But also on those individual workers. So climate change is something that impacts absolutely every single one of us, whether we are recognizing it or not. And so workers are very, very keen to find solutions to these issues.
I mean, we're seeing it for PAFSO and for people going overseas, right? There are more and more postings in cities where, it's just inhospitable, right? Like my last posting was in Warsaw, and there was an air pollution, air pollution was an issue there, especially in the wintertime, because a lot of people, they were still burning coal and, like it's in kind of a valley, and the air from cars and stuff gets trapped. But after I left, it got way, way worse, to the point that like people were wearing masks outside. People had to have special air filter things in their houses, and more and more cities are like that. And I mean, honestly, when I heard about this, I thought, okay, I probably wouldn't have been able to stay there. Maybe, I have allergies and things like that, and it's like there are people who can't live in those places, let alone like the poor people who live there because that's their home. But for us, it's becoming more and more, the issue of air quality and the issue of natural disasters and infrastructure in different places. As we look at the safety and security of our members, like it's becoming more and more of an issue for sure. And even for PAFSO, we were looking at, okay, what can we do? Where's our impact on climate change? And we realized we print a magazine, supposed to be 3 times a year, and deliver it to all of our members, and then we started to think, that's the carbon footprint on that is pretty high. Maybe we should think about, coming back to like the youth liking to have things digital and so on. Maybe we need to go, we're moving to a digital first platform for that, at least, to stop doing that piece of it. But it affects everything when you start thinking about it.
For sure. And when you think about smaller communities that are very dependent on one kind of industry, right? When you're thinking about, a coal-powered, plant, I think about Estevan, Saskatchewan. When that plant closes, that community is decimated. You're taking 800 really good family and community sustaining jobs out of the community. That means all of the spin-off jobs are gone out of that community too. Municipal workers are impacted, education workers, retail workers, service workers, healthcare workers, and workers are understanding that. Like there is a link to their job, maybe not directly to that particular industry, but there is a link when that industry has to pivot and change. And so it's in everyone's interest to be paying attention to these things and to really acknowledge that change has to happen, but that we need to find pathways to good, sustainable employment all across the communities in this country.
Yeah. It's not a simple, just switch this and then have this other thing. I hope they're going to invest more like in retraining and things for people, because I worked part-time from high school all through grad school until right before I came to join the Foreign Service at the telephone company, MTS in Manitoba. And I remember, when they switched away from different types of technology, it was hard on people. People did not understand, and it was, but they did offer, a lot of retraining and a lot of different options for people, if they wanted to take buyouts and go back to school and do different things, which did kind of soften the blows a little bit. But like if we can't breathe, we won't be working either. Right.
This is true. And, I always feel like when we're thinking about retraining, those things have to happen early, not when a plant closure is announced. It
Yeah.
has to be a collaborative effort between the employer, the union representing those workers, right, and levels of government to find that pathway and to make sure that it's timed out properly, because leaving folks without that training and trying to catch up is difficult. You have folks that are very worried. They've been working for decades in a certain industry. Retraining isn't always an easy option either. So these are all thoughtful discussions that in a tripartite way that need to happen.
Yeah, like in Poland, they were transitioning away from coal, but they realized at a certain point that they were not going to be able to make that transition for the current generation of workers. That they were like, so they were encouraging people who were working in the coal industry to say, okay, listen, your son or daughter is not going to have a job in this industry in this the same way. So here are options, to help your kid get the right education, to you should be channeling them towards these things. So we used to say, not the coal miner, but the coal miner's daughter. We would we're behind. But before they came up with that strategy, they they were just getting like massive resistance to any kind of change, because people could not see how they were going to survive without those industries. Now with the war between Russia and Ukraine and the effects on fuel and things like that, I wonder if some of that's been stalled, because they probably need some of that coal again for immediate needs, but it gets complicated for sure.
But you made a good point there, Pam. Like, if people don't see a pathway for themselves, they're going to be resistant to change. So it's upon all of us to have these conversations, right, and to foster this dialogue. Because if people don't see a pathway, we're not actually going to achieve our climate goals, and we can't afford to wait, in my mind.
Yeah, and just yelling at people, like, hey, can't you see this happening and you should change everything, is not really not going to work. Coming back to your point at the beginning about the rise in populism and the polarization of everybody and not listening.
Yeah,
no,
it's
so
a big concern.
Yeah. So listen, it's 5 to 10. So maybe I'll ask, do you guys have any final points that you wanna make? Tim, you've been quiet for the
Go for it, Tim.
do you have anything that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Well, look, I appreciate very much the invite, Pam, that you gave to Bea and I to attend your session this morning. It's really appreciated. Like I say, for me, my core work at the Congress is to help, the Congress operate, but also to grow the labor movement. I'm very passionate personally about this. And so the opportunity to come and talk to you and to learn about a whole different sector of workers than I had previously been able to hear about or know about or understand what the issues are has been really interesting to me and really meaningful. And I hope we can continue these conversations go forward.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I think, it's good for us to be reminded how we fit in with everyone else as well. Because sometimes I think as FS, we're like, we're special. And, maybe we are special. You got all my members, you are all special, but you're not necessarily unique in your specialness. That's a good message to get.
Well, I would think that I like to think of all of the affiliates that belong to the CLC as being very special in their own way, right? They all have their specific sector, their,
their regions that they represent. You know, they all have very specific goals, but working collectively, we've been able to achieve some really, really amazing things in Canada. And so we want to continue to work collectively, and we look forward to working with your folks in whichever capacity possible. But I would really urge your folks to have a look at canadianlabour.ca to see what we're all about and to see what resources there are available to join some of our campaigns, you know, in whichever way they choose, and to see what speaks to them.
Thank you. That sounds like a great way to end. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to just stop the recording.